Mulcharmies are a detriment to Yugioh. Their implementation was already a cause for concern, and now that an adequate amount of time has elapsed, it has become clear that these cards should not have been made in the first place and are not an adequate solution to modern Yu-Gi-Oh! That is the argument posited by NerdFactor over on X.com, formerly known as the tweeting page, filled with normal people who understand nuance and can handle a balanced discussion on the internet. Let's dive into today's subject and dissect this topic in complete depth. This thread has caused an uproar of discussion, and to be quite frank, the Charmy situation is crazy. So we will be looking at each of the situations here, taking a look at some community commentary, discussing the pros and cons of the Mulcharmies, discussing their implementation into the game and why they were made, their goals, and if those goals have indeed been successfully fulfilled, rounding off with my own personal thoughts, opinions, and conclusions, which of course is naturally going to be correct because it's my YouTube video. It's my house, I get the player one controller. Situation 1. Modern Yu-Gi-Oh! I am going first, uninterrupted. I will end on more interrupts than you have cards in hand. I win. This is a typical situation which has rapidly become the case since the modernization of the game, as too commanding of a position. For as long as Yu-Gi-Oh's been around, going second has rarely been an optimal strategy. And while I'm sure you can very intelligently say the words Tenpai or Sky Striker, for each deck that you name that optimally, willingly chooses to go second, you could name about 30 others that would actually in fact rather go first, and that indeed has mostly been the meta for all of Yu-Gi-Oh's lifespan. In the year 2007, we saw one of the first real relevant hand traps be developed, DD Crow, a card which simply pitches itself from the hand to banish a card from the graveyard, banishing Malicious to prevent synchro plays, manipulating your opponent's dark counts for dad, hitting Fiendsmith Engraver. DD Crow for almost 20 years has been a fairly decent card, and has very shockingly stood the test of time surprisingly well. Well, what does this have to do with the Mulcharmy situation? Well, it was almost 20 years ago Konami identified that going first perhaps needed some addressing. 3 years later, cards like Effect Veiler were made. 2 years after that, Max C. 5 after that was Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. And 2 years thereafter was the infamous Megaton, Dimension Shifter, and Nibiru the Primal Being. For almost the entire duration of Yu-Gi-Oh's competitive existence, there has been a constant arms race to fix this problem. The dichotomy between going first versus going second, and how to balance each, while also naturally having to power creep one for the other. And how was this problem fixed last year? Situation 2. The fix. I'm going first. I Charmy you. You're ending on 1 to 2 interrupts. I start with 6 cards in hand. You can't Charmy me back. I'm going first with a battle phase. I win. And the argument in favor of today's video theory is this one. The suggestion in this panel is that for all intents and purposes, resolving a Charmy when going second is essentially skipping your opponent's turn. By forcing them into an almost negligible board, beginning their turn with 6 cards after an extra or main deck monster has been summoned, they will cycle their deck for at least 1 card and essentially skip the turn, and hence going first despite having the battle phase. Now, why is this correct? And also, why is this wrong? This situation specifically will evoke all kinds of different reactions from you, the viewer, depending on what deck you play. Some archetypes throughout the game's history need to enter the main deck and extra deck multiple times to even really achieve anything. We're talking fair combos here. One of the worst examples of this I can think of would be something like Marine Cess, Salomon Great, Ritual Beast. There are plenty of decks that you can think of that likely need to special summon multiple times, but don't really do that much. These kind of decks do a whole lot of stuff, but don't really end on much other than 2 to 3 disruptions.
Yes, I know that Ritual Beast can Protoss you, but that's a problem with the Floodgates and not actual Ritual Beast cards.
It's a Steeds, a Banish, and a Rank 4, come on. These kind of decks do a whole lot, but ultimately ending on very minimal disruptions, which some would argue would be fair interactive Yu-Gi-Oh! Now conversely, on the opposite end of the spectrum, there are decks which can do a lot without giving your opponent a single card. Blue Eyes is a perfect example in which it can activate Beryl's Field effect to set Drill Beam, use the other effect to send Blue Eyes Rise to the graveyard, bring it back with the Lordly Load since it doesn't need to summon from the main deck, get a trap card to pop your cards with True Light after resolving Maiden. Doing all of this while also still potentially drawing a hand trap for their turn, like setting an Imperm or having a Veiler in the hand. That is 2 real disruptions created from 0 Full Loss draws. This is a perfect counter to the Situation 2 argument. However, not every deck is Blue Eyes. And even in the best case situation of this specific example, not every hand has a Primite card. There will be hands and there are decks that if you want to put up even a single disruption, you will have to enter the main deck or extra deck at least once. And in the case of just making Spirit Pass without Primite cards, more often than not, that's 2 draws. So you get to go +1 for Spirit Dragon Pass. Is that fair? Well, some would argue yeah. On the side of unfair, my entire turn was pretty much shut down and inhibited by 1 single hand trap. No skill expression, no well-timed holding of a Imperm, for example, on a particular choke point, just bang. Activate Full Loss, it lingers for the entire turn, and now I'm at the mercy of your 6-card hand with a battle phase while you're hoping that you've drawn enough counter hand traps. And again, to emphasize, not every deck can play as well as Blue Eyes does under Full Loss. Now, arguing in the sense that it's reasonable, it has prevented you from making multiple Spirit Dragons, a Crimson Dragon line potentially if you play that, Hieratic Seals as well, the extra normal summon from the Link 1 to get more disruption like Searching Effect Veiler with Sage, or even doing another Synchro Summon with Spirit into Baron the Floor. Some would argue that it's good that Konami are designing decks in ways that it can actually have viable plays under Full Loss, but also not completely vomiting out its entire hand. It's good that Konami have designed decks to be more versatile and resilient in their approach to a turn, specifically under Full Loss. Well, that's both sides of the argument. We'll talk about conclusions after. Situation 3. Bluss. I'm going first. I Charmy you. Thanks to your non-engine being draw cards, I now have 3 to 6 extra copies of Call by the Grave in my deck. You have been hand looped for 1. I win. So this is essentially the situation 1 we mentioned earlier, except in this case, both players now have 1 less card. You see, by playing 6 copies of Call by the Grave in your deck, designed specifically to beat Full Loss, Maxi, statistically, player 1 will draw the answers to Full Loss more often than not than you will see Full Loss, just by virtue of having more copies of cards like Call by Crossout Ash. This is the standard side quest that we've all come to know from Yu-Gi-Oh! Did you draw Fua? Yes. Did I draw Ash? Yes, I win. Did you draw Fua and I didn't draw Ash? Well, you win. A gross oversimplification of a duel, but it cannot be understated that there have been many games played out in this exact flowchart style diagram. These are the kind of checkpoints that both players go through at the start of every single game. And it feels like a formality that one must pass through each and every single time they sit down to play the game. Now let's talk about the counter argument to this first and foremost. So if you go first and draw the answer to my single Full Loss, you get to essentially go first uninhibited, completely uninterrupted, and we are just back to situation 1, which is of course a problem that we've discussed many times in multiple different videos over why that's bad in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! However, you could also counter this by saying that player 2 will have 5 other cards in their hand, some of which could be real disruption for the 4 remaining cards. There is still a duel to be had and other cards to play through. However, while countering the counter argument, that's kind of what the whole point of the panel is saying. Full Loss, Ash Blossom playing against the Full Loss didn't meaningfully add anything to the game, other than just looping both players for 1 card. Full Loss in this case essentially acting as a band-aid for an inherent core problem of the game. These cards are just adding layers of variance to the duel. Checkpoints, coin flips, rather than meaningfully engaging with the problem mechanically. The minigame was just a checkpoint, a cutscene, a prelude to the actual duel itself of engine versus engine. So why are they even in the game in the first place? Situation 4. What? Fuck you mean these aren't once per turn? Now, it's quite a funny interaction, but hilariously enough, it seems like in order to combat the previous situation, Konami specifically made these cards twice per turn so as to avoid the minigame issue. Nothing worse than drawing multiple hand traps that are once per turn, like Double Ash Blossom, realizing that it can't work. Because of having such a centrifugal force in a duel that is Full Loss or Maxi, etc., these cards have to resolve in order to give you a chance going second, and so they've kind of just allowed you to use them twice. Game state beneficiality per player with all of the varying extreme examples. We have the baseline turn 1 being predominantly in favor of playing 1 comparatively to the holder of Max C and its associates, predominantly benefiting player 2 under most circumstances with effect of well-designed cards in the middle. More oversimplifications of a game of what modern Yu-Gi-Oh is, but I suppose one can only fit so much nuance and analysis within a single tweet. Every game depends way too much on whether these single cards resolve or not. They're completely over-centralizing and add nothing but additional coin flips to the game. So I think that the argument that the pro-Charmy people would make in Situation 2 make a bit of a stronger point, whereas the argument that the anti-Charmy people are making in Situation 3 I think is a stronger point in this example. So to recap, playing under Fuwalos with unique lines and ways to set up, giving your opponent minimal draws, while retaining some of your own hand traps and disruptions in the process is a interesting and meaningful way to play the game. Restricting decks from going all out, forcing them to play a little bit more defensively, I think conceptually sounds like a cool idea and a good thing. However, as stipulated under Situation 3, the question really is, ultimately, have you addressed the core root of the issue? I would argue no, you've just created new cards, but haven't actually dealt with and engaged with the core problem of the game itself, and that is going second in Yu-Gi-Oh! Just by and large is not really a positive experience, and definitely does not have as high of a win rate anywhere close to going first. So ultimately, what I would like to see is the true fundamentals of the game be addressed rather than just throwing in more cards like Dark Ruler and Nibiru and Dimension Shifter and Mulcharmy, Fuwalos, and who knows what's next down the pipeline to help going second. In 2014, Konami made the bold decision to simply reduce the cards in hand of the player by 1. That's been the case for over a decade now, and by and large, nobody has really complained about this. For me, I've always given suggestions as to what new rule changes could work. I would like to see more cards printed like Zeus, as an example. A landmark of a very well-designed card in my opinion, and it is genuinely a shame that it hasn't been as relevant just because there aren't as many XC decks. Now the TCG has Raizio, but that deck locks itself into 4s just by breathing. Typhon, ironically, is also a very well-designed card that in my opinion is very undertuned. I would like to see another version of Typhon. I don't think it should lock you from summoning for the rest of the turn. I'd like to see something like Typhon Remade where you can summon it perhaps in main phase 2, but freezes monster above 3000 and you can still keep summoning. I've made the suggestion before that each player should get 1 normal summon per main phase rather than 1 normal summon per turn. There's also been suggestions that player 2 should start the duel with 6 cards rather than start the duel with 5 cards and drawing to 6 on that turn too, meaning that you just have a statistically higher chance of opening more hand traps. Essentially, I think modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Is past the point of trying to throw more and more cards at the card pool to try and alleviate this issue. I don't want to keep seeing Nibiru, Dart Ruler, etc. being remade every couple of years. I want to see more new cards made that are kind of addressing the game mechanically, like the Zeus and the Typhon, but also potentially some more rule changes here and there. Whether you agree with my suggestions or not are not really the point here. The point that I'm making is that the core level of the game should be addressed rather than just more and more new cards. Because more and more new cards by and large just means here's a bunch more hand traps. One thing that I'll always be parroting is that the solution is definitely not lingering card effects. The biggest reason that I can give you for why lingering card effects shouldn't be in the game, especially hand traps like Duel, Mulcharmy, Maxi, and Master Duel, is because like just thinking about it mathematically, should one card have an influence over the game that covers the 50% of the duel? A lingering card effect lasts an entire turn. Typically, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is 2 turns. You can kind of guess with about 80% accuracy who has won the game just by looking at someone's board by the end of turn 2. So should a lingering card effect be so prevalent so as to take up about 50% of a duel? Even 33% of the game is really going to turn 3. I don't think that sounds reasonable. I think that's too much of an impact for one card. Now, let's take a look at some community input. Multiple World Championship competitor and DC Cup 2025 winner Herman Hansen says, "This is why I have entirely moved to Master Duel in the past year. Obviously, all of the problems discussed are actually even more further exacerbated in Master Duel because of Max C, but I think what he's really referencing here is the existence of side decking and bringing in very detrimental lingering card effects when going second, like Lancia, like Fuwalos, and of course the variance that is easily eliminated by just playing multiple more games in Master Duel, like in the DC Cup, rather than one single tournament run and hoping for the best." Another multiple World Championship competitor, one of the best French players, players is Gabriel Susi, stating that I find that the Charmers are detrimental to the competitive well-being of Yu-Gi-Oh! Since their release. Obviously, this graph is only a simplification of the situation, which is much more complex, but it does illustrate some real issues. I'm currently on Fiendsmith Evil Twin, which can abuse the Charmies like no other. So I want to say this as a Chimera pilot instead. If you don't have a game plan for a Mulcharmy resolving, then I think you're not being serious with yourself about the game. It's a valid argument. If you're that concerned and worried about Mulcharmies, then there is a world where you have to pick a deck based on the fact that it has plays under Mulcharmy. There should be some sort of a game plan, a plan B, a backup for what happens when you get Fuad turn 1. Thank you so much for tuning into today's video. I hope I've done a good service into explaining the pros and cons of the Mulcharmy and tackling both sides of the argument for and against. If you want to see more discussion videos like this, it would help a lot if you would leave this video a like so that I know that you liked it and want to see more content like this in the future. Leave your thoughts and prayers down below. I'm not going to read them, but helps the algorithm. Consider becoming a Patreon member or a YouTube channel member for those cool tour guide emotes, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.